Whew. Welcome, bonsoir, good evening. My name is Lydie Dubuisson, and I am your host for the evening. Welcome to the Black Theatre Workshop's Artistic Directors Roundtable. Before we begin, I wish to acknowledge that I am standing on the unceded indigenous lands. The Ganyangehaga nations are the recognized custodians of the lands and waters on which we gather. And the Jojake is historically known as a gathering place for many nations and for millennia. For me, it is important to acknowledge the land, and it is important to normalize the conversation about colonial oppression, which is the reason why it is important to continue doing the acknowledgements. So let's remember the stories of this land and of its First Nations. Honor, respect. Now, tonight is about the Artistic Directors Roundtable. As you know, Black Theatre Workshop is celebrating this year, its 50th season. And in 50 seasons, I would like to announce to you that Black Theatre Workshop produced 140 productions. In 50 seasons, Black Theatre Workshops hired over 1,500 actors. They have mentored 103 artists. 2017, 2018, right here. And in 50 seasons, Black Theatre Workshops also had 13 artistic directors. And out of the 13 artistic directors, 4 of them are here with us tonight, and I'm going to introduce them to you. Please allow me to read their descriptions because they are they all have magnificent resumes. I need to read their accomplishments. So as our first guest, a dear and illustrious scholar, this man has many contributions to the Black community in Quebec, especially in the arts. He is best known as one of the founding members of the Black Theatre Workshops, and he is still an active member of the board at Black Theatre Workshop. Good evening, Dr. Clarence Bayne.
Good evening.
Good evening, how are you?
Not bad. As they say, it's a typical way of West Indian answering. They say, how are you? Say, not bad. That means I'm doing okay.
I see it. It's nice to have you with us. And our second guest is, this guest is a glass ceiling breaker. She has worked as a director, choreographer, educator, and an administrator in the arts organizations across Canada and in the US, including San Francisco's Lorraine Hansberry Theater, Richmond's East Bay Center for the Performing Arts, and Brooklyn Academy of Music. She was the recipient of Canada's Council of the Arts' first John Hirsch Prize for Young Directors. She was the artistic director of Black Theatre Workshop from 1994 to 1996. Good evening, Fleurette Fernando.
Hello, how are you?
I'm doing good. How are you?
Good. I'm zooming in to you from Houston, Texas.
Houston, that's what I was asking. I was like, it looks sunny where you are. Where are you?
Yeah, so I'm an hour behind y'all, so yeah.
Tell us about nice weather.
Yeah, it's getting hot and humid.
I'm just going to go to the next guest. We're not going to, until talking here is hard. The next guest is, this artist has been a presence in theater, film, television, music for over 35 years, amassing an impressive and varied body of work. Tyrone has been a fixture at Black Theatre Workshop since the early 80s, having worn many hats within the organization, including his current position as president of the board of directors, which makes him my boss. He was Black Theatre Workshop's artistic director from 2005 to 2011. Good evening, Tyrone Benskin.
Hello, how are you?
That's nice.
Hope you can all hear me. Good. And it's wonderful to see Fleurette. Haven't seen Fleurette since she took off to the US of A so many years ago, living in Texas.
She just took off? She just left us like that?
Just left.
Not true. Don't start spreading false info, Tyrone. This is you too, sir.
I'm not even trying to help, but it was lovely to watch the reunion back. It was lovely. And last but certainly not least, he's an actor, director, instructor, and administrator. As an actor, he has worked at Stratford Festival, Centaur Theater, Black Theater Workshop, St. Lawrence Shakespeare Festival, Jordan Productions, Repercussion, Biggery Theater, Shakespeare by the Sea, among many others. He has been the artistic director since 2011. Good evening, Quincy Armorer.
Good evening, Lydie. Hello, everyone. Good to see you all.
Great to see you.
You too.
How does it feel to be so many different ADs in the same, we're technically around the same table, but.
It's amazing. We were just, saying how time kind of is weird, it flies, and yet in some ways we're kind of the same, like it's been 25 years since I've seen a lot of these people, and yet it's like I saw them yesterday. So it's great to be reunited like this. So thank you for doing this for us.
Oh, it's such a great opportunity to, like, the knowledge that's right on the screen. That's absolutely amazing. And actually, Fleurette, you just mentioned 25 years. You were the director when Black Theater Workshop was celebrating its silver anniversary.
Right. Yeah. And it was a great time. And at that time, it seemed like, oh, we've accomplished so much. We're at 25 years. Now here we are at 50. So 75's ahead and 100's ahead of that. And I hope we're going to hit all of these milestones. Really, really special. And I'm honored to be a part of it.
This is awesome. I'd like to begin with a question that I would like all of you to answer. And it's about something that I've realized, because there's something a little bit mysterious about the AD of a company. We are aware that you exist, but how heavy is the burden and the vision that you have to bring into the company? So my first question to each one of you, and I will probably start with Clarence, with Dr. Bayne, and then I'll ask each one of you if you could provide your answer of your time as an AD. What is it like to bring your vision and facing the challenges of the reality of being an AD? And Dr. Bayne, since you are the founder of the company and you had to launch that adventure, what was it like to be an AD and bring a vision and face the challenges?
Well, having been in that position and having been a teacher of management and the origin of organization and growth of organizations, I now realized that I wasn't really an AD in the sense that, say, Tyrone was or that Quincy is. I was an AD in the sense of a group of people who were enthusiastic about something and decided that they had to do something about it. They had to correct the situation. And they were what you were describing organizational growth as the initial enthusiastic beginners of the organization. And at that point in time, it's not really an organization, it's a response to a condition that you had to change. So I never saw myself really having a responsibility and a burden. I saw myself as fighting a battle with a number of other persons, and in some way or the other, emerging as the person who kept the accounts, the person who represented the cause, the person who convinced people that they should work for nothing, the person who helped to paint the sets when they didn't have, the person who they told, you got us into this and we have a shortage of individuals, so you have to fill in for that. The person who took down the sets and helped to build the sets, the persons who fought in the initial stages with people in the government that didn't even believe that we were capable of something called theater. So that I came, fortunately, I was one of these persons who can learn and emerge at another level. And sooner or later, one person came along, trained in the theater arts, and said, Clarence, you're not going to be the executive director anymore, and the president at the same time. The artistic director is going to take over from that. You're going to do the administration and president. So I never really felt that I was burdened. I really felt that I was just, in a sense, creating a space in which I can exist with a sense of pride and dignity, and a sense of my own capacities to walk freely, speak freely, and act, not in the sense of being on a stage, but act as an individual in a society. And in the process, I started writing. Some of it worked. Fortunate for me, Tyrone came along, and Fleurette came along, and all the others came along, and I just continue to assist in whatever way I can, and be very vocal. So that's my sense.
And how about for you, Fleurette, who was in the 90s? What were the challenges and bringing your vision as a Black woman?
You know, it's interesting to hear Clary explain what was happening at the very beginning, because I think we all had similar challenges along the way, but we had little bits of structure as the organization grew. So by the time I came along 25 years later, there was the sense of it being an institution with a history and structure and a reputation. So I was lucky because I kind of had a little bit of a history to fall back on, and people in the community that knew what BTW was and supported it. I was coming from Toronto, so in many ways it was a new environment for me. I was fresh out of the National Theatre School of Canada, so I had my tenure there as a directing student in Montreal. And the story actually is how I came about the job was that I came to BTW to cast a show, my very last show at NTS. I was doing a two-man show of Kiss of the Spider Woman. And because it took place in South America, I wanted a Black actor to play one of the roles. And I came to BTW just to look through the files of the actors. And I found the file of Alex Chapman, who did many shows at BTW and went on to do all kinds of wonderful things in film and in television. And when I was leaving, so I'm getting ready to graduate, I'm about to do this show, have to cast. As I'm leaving, I see the job description on a cork board in the hallway. And, you know, this is before phones, before you could take a picture of it and walk away. So I literally pulled the thing off the cork board so that nobody else could apply. And I went back to school, you know, with the job description. And so there was really, for me, a sense that this was an organization that had a strong sense of community, that had, you know, it was the place I went to find my Black actor that I needed to cast in my show. And so for me, 25 years after Clary began his journey, I actually felt like I was coming into something that had a structure and had support. Of course, all of those same battles that Clary talked about, you know, a level of racism, a level of, you know, having to prove yourself as an artistic director, having to prove yourself as an organization continued to be there. I'm sure Quincy will say it continues to be there on some level even today. But I actually felt very blessed at that time to have the opportunity to hone my craft, so to speak, in a place that was so supportive. You know, coming out of National Theatre School, being one of the few people of color in that program at that time, to come into a space like BTW, and I really understand this better now, you know, having some perspective 25 years after the fact, was almost like, you know, kind of entering a warm bath in some ways. It had its challenges and it had its drama, you know, off the stage, and it had, you know, all of the issues that I'm sure exist today, but there was a real sense of support. And there was a real sense that this was a place that, as a young artist, I could try things and maybe even fail to some degree and know that people still had my back. And that was invaluable to me as a young director, you know, and looking back on it now, I realize what a gift that was.
I can totally imagine. Absolutely. That's a privilege to express and explore.
Yes, yes. And know that you're supported, you know, by older artists, by more seasoned artists, by a community of people. That was very, that was invaluable, yeah.
Amazing. And then if we go chronologically, then it would be Tyrone. What was your experience like?
I think mine was, you know, I think everybody's was, you know, was unique in their own way. But I mean, I started with Black Theatre Workshop as an actor in 1980. And
you didn't see that.
And I was actually in university, and Terry Donald was one of the who was, you know, very instrumental in the growth of Black Theatre Workshop back in the day, and he was directing a show, and I was still at Concordia, And he needed a young black man for one of the shows he was directing for Black Theater Workshop, Gingerbread Lady. And it was a small part, like a couple of lines at the very end of the play. And he asked me to do it. And that's how I got connected with Black Theater Workshop. And, fast forward a bunch of years later, and, through the board, being on the board, through, as, Claire likes to remind me, sitting in the basement of the Black Studies Center, developing a subscription program back in the 80s or early 90s at some point, to, doing shows and then being on the board and then becoming the artistic director and then come back on the board, running off to run the country for 4.5 years as a member of Parliament. But all that experience, sort of added its strength to it. And like Fleurette, when I became the AD, there was even more structure there. There was a respect that was for Black Theater Workshop that had grown within the community, within the theater community, as well as the community. And so it was easier, I think, for me to just kind of branch out a bit and not so much to think about the struggle, but fight the struggle through discovering stories. And that was what I basically brought into, what I focused on, was finding stories, finding all these wonderful stories, Canadian stories, world stories that have been hidden, have been, and when I say hidden, I mean deliberately kept from us, finding out about the stories of Black Canadians way back when in the Amber Valley in Saskatchewan, the Salt Spring Islands in BC, even Black communities here, learning more about the Nova Scotia, Black loyalists, and finding those stories and trying to bring those stories to light, and just, I guess, touting our existence long before, not only around slavery and that struggle and the Middle Passage, but finding out stories about the accomplishments of people of color, people of African descent, and celebrating those stories and letting people know that they exist and that we exist outside of the context of, the blues, and outside of the context of slavery, and outside of the context of inner city strife and all of that, but in a context of beauty, and in the context of magnificence, and in the context of just presence, our presence here, we exist.
That's I can understand why it's fulfilling to go to work when it's for such reason, like unearthing stories, invisible stories, untold stories that need to be remembered. And finally, the actual director till today, how is it to bring your vision and to face the challenges?
Well, I think I'm probably the lucky one because I'm following in the footsteps of these three wonderful artists, as well as all of the other artistic directors that came before me who paved the way. And so there was a lot, perhaps less work for me to do in terms of a lot of what Dr. Clarence Bayne had to do in beginning the company. Yeah, I think in terms of when it comes to vision and what I wanted to bring to the company going into its 5th decade, just starting at season 41. A lot of what Tyrone was saying, I think, wanting to make sure that we're finding those new stories and finding out those untold stories from new voices. But also just getting to know the artists in the community was one of the things that I was particularly interested in. And along that way, just learning what the responsibilities of being an AD are and can be. And so, for example, for myself, like I wanted to find new playwrights and new stories to tell, and so was looking to be commissioning some work. And we've done quite a bit of that. But one of my favorite stories to tell is when we did Donna Michelle St. Bernard's Gas Girls in 2014. having a conversation with her, who I just adore her and have so much love and respect for her. But we were talking, I believe it was at the opening night performance, and she had mentioned to me that it was the first time that she was ever having a second production of any of her plays. And that's something that resonated with me, because I, as a new AD, was looking like, who hasn't been produced yet? What are the new works, to get those new plays out there? And then learning after the fact that often that's what happens. We support these new playwrights or these new plays, and they get that inaugural premiere, and then often they don't get to have a life after that. And so my vision, I guess, evolved after that conversation, really, to make sure that I wanted to balance the new voices and the new plays and the new stories, along with other ones that have already been put out there but are worth revisiting and having our audiences reconnect with. And so, that's still happening now. Even going now and in 10 years in, I'm still looking for those stories that are new and that we want to be focusing on in this context now, 2021. But also, what are the important stories that were already out there but that need to be revisited? So that's important to me too.
It almost sounds like you're building a local Black canon. That sounds very cool.
Well, I think that's part of what BTW over the course of 50 years has done. I think we've all contributed to that, and that's one of the things that we can all be very proud of. Absolutely.
I love us. Okay. Well, that was great. Thank you for your answers. I'm about to get a bit serious. I have some questions. Dr. Bayne, you already answered a bit the question with explaining how you worked with the spark and the need to start producing and telling our stories from that specific point of view and from Afro descendants, which explains the need for Black Theater Workshop. But till today, 50 years later, we still need Black Theater Workshop. Why do we still need, till today, and probably that we will still need in 25 years, Black Theater Workshop?
I don't see theater as something existing outside of life. I see theater as life, right? I often say when I'm talking to some people that just put your hands together and look through the hole in it and move it along, and you would see that you're a film producer. You will see scenes that you never really thought existed just by looking through there. And I come to realize with that, I have to believe in what Shakespeare said. All the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players. We have entrances and our exits in each one. And that's what it is. Life is a stage. Life is theater. Theater is like religion. Theater is like the discovery of self, right? That's what it's like to me. Theater is like community development. Theater is not being on stage. You are the stage. The world is your stage. You cannot escape it. So that's why we are still telling stories, because we have no choice but to express ourselves, and we continue to be in theater. Mm-hmm. No, that's it. That's just from my perspective. I'm not I was never really what you would call a professional theater person, and that was pointed out to me by many of the funding agencies like Canada Council and Calkin, all these, right? Anytime I spoke to them, they always reminded me that if they were going to fund us, they wouldn't be funding people like me. But I was not really a thing. And in fact, when we got our first grant from Canada Council, it came with a letter which simply says, "We are going to fund you, and when you receive this money, you need to get the money. You go out and you get yourself a professional artistic director and a professional administrator," right? So I stepped into the background and went out and got a professional administrator and a professional artistic director. And that came in about 1983. They did not consider the fact that we had done so, that we had laid the foundation in a very solid way that we didn't even realize that we were laying it. When we did Fact and Fancy, the calypso opera produced by Johnny Cayon, when we went back and did things that by Derek Walcott that was only known and done in Trinidad, where Derek did a lot of his work to start with. They didn't understand the fact that the way in which we told stories that came out of the carnival and what we call mass and pan in Trinidad, right? They didn't even know. They didn't even know that we met us Bosco Holder at the Royal Theatre in Port of St. Charlotte Street. And that it was by looking at the things that he was doing back then, even before he even got a visa to go to the United States. That is what made. That's how theater was introduced to us. Mm-hmm. They didn't even know that we never really understood Shakespeare until we went to the university here. But what we understand was Carnival and Mass, and that Carnival and Mass was African street theater. They didn't understand that. We didn't even understand it ourselves. We were just doing it, right? So it's why is theater necessary? Because theater is life. That's why theater is necessary. That's why we keep telling the same stories in different ways. Because theater is life.
That's so fascinating. But it's fascinating because indeed. The audience feels validated as you are the artist discovering your own art and your own storytelling. So that's really fascinating. And it kind of explains the need to feel represented and to be seen, because exactly, to be erased and to just suddenly need to just like, we're just going to tell our own stories, and to realize that, well, look at this, this is actually theater, but it's more coming from a need to just express. I think that's absolutely beautiful. Is there any of you, if you wanted to add something to Clarence?
I'd like to add to that, and it's become a bit of a mantra with me, but mankind is nothing without story. Mankind did not exist really until the cave painting in France. And they went from cave paintings in France to the troubadours during the Renaissance, through the Globe Theatre, through to Stratford-on-Avon, through to Black Theatre Workshop, through to the Stratford Festival in Ontario. It's all about stories. How do we know we exist? The whole tree in the forest thing, falling in the forest. It's through the story. The indigenous people through dance and drumming and singing tell who they are. That's theater. African nations through mask work and drumming and dance tell who they are. And theater is a means of telling who we are, who we aspire to be, as well as who we are in, as seen through those lenses. And so when I talk about discovering stories, it's not simply about talking about or finding words to share with people. It's finding these things that tell us, as I said earlier, that we exist. And the only way we know how to exist, or we know that we exist, is through our stories. As a nation, we are embattled with, Canadian content. What is Canadian content? What does that mean versus American content? And it's not about wheat fields and beavers and maple syrup. It's about how we tell stories as Canadians, and it's about how we tell stories as people of African descent in Canada, and how we tell stories as people of African descent around the world, and how Africans tell stories. And so Black Theatre Workshop, I think, is vital. One, because we are the oldest Black theatre company in Canada. I dare say we are one of the oldest in North America. And, and other than our sister, our brothers and sisters in Toronto with Obsidian Theatre, these are the only two sort of major voices that both create and disseminate work from the African diaspora. So we are the only place that people outside of our community that we share the rest of the world with can come and learn a bit more about who we are.
Yep.
Other than what's shown on TV and what's shown on in commercials and what's shown in movies. So the relevance of Black Theatre Workshop is an ongoing thing, and we hope we'll be around in 50 years more.
Oh, yeah. No hoping, it's a certainty. I just decided that. Thank you, Tyrone. And actually, the next question that I wanted to ask was for you. As you know, well, I think we're already approaching, but one of the questions that I wanted to ask you was, why do we love Black Theatre Workshop so much? But I think that we already kind of embrace why we need and so on. But the other question that I have for you is because you have been a board member, you have been an actor, but you were also an AD. And I'd like to know, how important is the environment, politics, while you do while you're programming a season? How much is that part of the work?
I try, ironically, I try to not allow politics into, I try not to let politics into my decision making. In our 45th anniversary, I wanted to celebrate some of the great works that are out there. And for our school tour, for example, I decided to do Amiri Baraka's The Dutchman. Some people may know him as Leroy Jones. At the time, but he changed his name to Amiri Baraka. And I did that as a school tour. It's a pretty intense piece. And I remember, getting sort of grumblings from the board when I put it out there and had to sell the board on it, but they went along with it. And I, of course, limited it to, high schools and so forth. But the response that we got was really, really, I found really interesting, because there were a lot of kids who were just not aware of the 60s and the 70s movement and the civil rights movement and, the dynamics, white-black dynamics back in those days. And, it was something that elicited a lot of discussion. And that's why I wanted to do it. And I didn't want to sort of appease the educational community and appease this group and appease that group. I felt I needed to do something that just went out there and caused people to and encouraged people to talk or push people into talking. And so I try not to, and I think as an artist, we all have to sort of decide how much politics are we going to, allow in? So I think because what we do, we try to do with integrity. I don't believe we get a lot of pushback from government agencies and so forth, because we're not going out there to, just to annoy people. We are, we're really trying to just get people to think, get people to talk, get people to interact, as uncomfortable as it can be sometimes, but it's necessary. Change is messy.
Absolutely.
And, yeah. So that's my thought.
Anyone else wanted to add? Because
well, I'll add to what Tyrone says in terms of that we never recognized the politics. We did what we felt was necessary to the issues that we were dealing with, and on several occasions, not from outside the community, from inside the community. I remember that one instance was a Black woman who had brought her two grandchildren. Basically, she was an older woman, and to one of the shows that we'd done, and the show progressed from a point where the character was breaking down, and was feeling that he had been rejected as an artist, as a Calypsonian, and that preference was being given to the young Calypsonians that was catering more to the tourists, and that the lessons of life and the pain of life that he was presenting through his songs was being set aside, and he became more abusive in the terms of how he responded to people, and got to a point where he was really using some very nasty language, so to speak, in when talking to or presenting his position. And this woman came up to me at the end of the show, and she said to Clarence Bayne, "You invited me to come to this show, and you didn't tell me it was going to have all this abusive, nasty language. And I brought my grandchildren to this show, and I am embarrassed. And the next time you have a show and you don't tell me what the show is about, and I come into this, I'm going to sue you." And that was that was not the only incident of that kind. I remember that we and Tyrone, what was it? That show that you said you were in, Gingerbread Lady. We were invited to the Rebecca Quinn auditorium in Halifax, right? And we took the show there, and we're going to be doing it for, I think it was 4 nights or something like that. And it was especially gratifying to me because I always wish for the day that we weren't just going to be looking at 20 people or 10 people in the audience. We were going to be looking at the audience as large as Stratford, right? And I don't know how they did it, but they had, the first night we had literally 900 people. This Halifax black lady wearing her black hat with a net, actually, nets. She came with her grandson, I believe it was a grandson, and she said, "Sir, is this play going to have any cursing in it?" And I was standing there with Leon St. Martin, and I said, no, because the play had no cursing. I don't know what happened to one of the actors when he came on stage. I guess he was so blown apart by the audience and the response that his reaction to he used a couple of swear words. So in the intermission, Leon and I are standing talking, and I see this lady come in straight at us, and I just panic. I say, "Leon, you speak to her. I have to go to the washroom." So no, in the early days, and I still think now, we never really thought about, when he did things like where the state of the dialogue is at, and a lot of the Black American stuff. We just did what we believed we had to do. We never paid attention to the embarrassment that some of our colleagues had, or paid any attention to the overall public. So for a while, we did have a little bit of a tinge to us. We didn't back away from it, but we sought to educate the public, and in particular to educate our community, that these swear words were not swear words in the religious, anti-religious type of context. It was an expression of frustration, anger, the abuse that we as a people had, and the pain that we have felt. And you have to allow us to express ourselves.
And that's what theater does, right? It's taking the risk and exposing and being vulnerable. And I'm sorry, you don't have to answer, Fleurette, but since we are talking about like what is politics and programming, and 1994 to 1996 leaves 1995 in the middle in Quebec. Do you want to answer the question, or you don't?
Sure. I think what's so interesting in listening to all of this is the diversity of backgrounds and expressions and perspectives within this idea of a Black theater. I think people on the outside see it as a monolithic kind of experience, and we all know from within that it absolutely wasn't. Whether it was our politics, or our artistic expression, or our cultural backgrounds, or our experience of immigration, or how many generations of our family perhaps were in Canada, or where, there were so many nuances, French versus English, right? In Montreal, there were so many nuances, continue to be, I'm sure, of what we consider to be the Black experience. And so, of course, in the 90s, when I was, very young, fresh, as I told you, coming out of theater school, speaking of swear words, the sign of the times at that moment was hip hop. We were in this sort of, renaissance in some ways that was happening in my generation in popular culture. And it was something that was very important to me that I felt I was a part of. It was a movement, political movement and a cultural movement that I felt that I was very much a part of. And it was important to me to integrate that into the work we were doing in this traditional theater space. And so for me, my artistic bent at that moment was about breaking down the idea of what a theater was. And I was connecting with young people who were dub poets and rappers and breakdancers and, performing in clubs and performing in kind of alternative spaces, and bring them into what was a little bit more of a traditional theater where I was trained. I was trained, at NTS and trained as a theater student, as a young person in high school. And so for me at that moment, the politics was very much informing my decision making as an artistic director, and my aesthetic and some of the choices that I made. And I was thinking, Tyrone, when you were talking about the Dutchman, I believe that maybe the first time we both explored the play, I could be wrong, was when you did a piece for me when I was at NTS. So I was a student at NTS, and I did the Dutchman as an exercise and cast Tyrone.
With Joanna Noyes, no?
Yes, and so you were in my production at school, NTS, conservatory, whatever, and they gave us a little bit of a budget that we could hire, real actors, professional actors. That's where Tyrone came in, and we did a production, an in-class production of the Dutchman. And then years later, I remember you did Mounted at BTW, and I was like, I remember that at NTS. And so for me, Leroy Jones and, Amiri Baraka and that movement that happened in the 60s and 70s in theater, Black theater across the continent was very informative for me as a student. And it was something that bled into, my work at Black Theater Workshop. I think it continues to as well, just in terms of, there's a saying, and I'm going to botch it up, I'm sure, but when I was listening to Clary tell his story, that, he or she who tells the story owns the culture, and I think that that's really telling, because how we tell stories, and you're right, Tyrone, everybody who spoke about this, the importance of storytelling to the human experience, how we tell a story and the arc of the story and who is the hero of the story and who is the antagonist of the story, and how informs so much of how the culture is built, right? And who gets to tell their stories is also a big driver on how a culture is built. It's how laws are made. It's how politics comes to being. It's how societal structures happen. It's through the storytelling. And so the 90s was an interesting time because it kind of, for me at least, split the notion of who gets to tell the story and how they get to tell the story. Not just what the story is, but the medium by which the story is being told, with a backbeat or with a, through choreography or with, through a music video or through whatever it was, the poetry of rap music or whatever was happening at that time in many ways was revolutionary. I think people are going to look back on it and say it was revolutionary for its time, just as it was in the 60s, just as it was in the Harlem Renaissance, just as it was through so many other revolutions. So that was really, for me, the driver for me as a young, 20-something-year-old coming out of theater school and living in Montreal and being a first-generation kid. The politics for me was very, I think, ingrained in what I felt the artistry was about.
Beautiful. It's happening, by the way. My nephews and nieces are totally into glorification of the 90s. They wish they were there. They want Sony Walkmans. It's so cute to watch.
Wow. Yeah, that's cool. That's cool. It was a great time. I mean, my husband and I were talking about that just the other day, what an amazing time it was in Montreal. you know, the kind of activity that was happening, the nightlife, the cultural scene. And there was a political situation happening in Montreal too. The referendum was happening at that moment. It wasn't all lovely. You know, there was a lot of tension. There was a lot of identity politics happening. There was a lot going on. But from an artistic, cultural standpoint, it was a very exciting time to be in Montreal in the mid to late 90s, for sure.
And Quincy, do you want to add something quickly to this?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I think it's an interesting thing when it comes down to talking about politics and the politics of what theater can be or should be or shouldn't be or can't be or whatever it is. Like so many conversations around that. And I think that for me, it kind of lives in this place of it. I don't see it as a necessity, but I do embrace the possibility of it because I know that I think just because we are a Black organization, because we are Black people, Black artists, there's going to be some political nature to what we do. Sometimes it feels like, you know, I can walk to the corner store to go buy some milk, and walking on the street in this body, I feel is a political act in and of itself. And so in that regard, like it's almost impossible to get away from the politics of it. And then just also, I think that there's something to making sure that that we can do what we can to say what we have to say about our communities, plural, because I agree with what you're saying, Fleurette, that this monolithic view of who we are. I've kind of tried to stop using the Black community because we're not the Black community, we're the Black communities. But that's
right.
But, you know, even just being in situations where, for example, with some friends and colleagues of mine, we started a theater company called Metachroma Theater that exists in Montreal. We did a show several years ago, and we all got so busy that we haven't been able to get back to another one. But it's a company that was, you know, all visible minority artists who come together to work on shows to normalize our presence on stage, different from us. And the amount of people that would come up to me, because I was the BTW AD at the time, and go, so there's Black Theater Workshop and Metachroma Theater, what's the difference? And it just used to get under my skin because I'd always just be, Black Theater Workshop is a Black theater company, Metachroma Theater is not, next question. Like, it was really that simple. And so for me, I just find that it's hard not to get into or involved in some ways into politics, doing what we do. But I'm happy to embrace it when it happens, but it's not something that I feel that we have to, like, you know, focus on or hit on the head all the time. I'm more interested in, you know, as, you know, telling our stories and making sure that we're having a good time while we're doing it at the same time.
Thank you.
And just what Quincy's saying, just the fact that people feel the need / right to ask that question. Metachrome Theater, Black Theater Workshop, what's the difference? People don't ask Centaur Theater, Siegel Center, what's the difference? You know, they don't ask that. It's, you know, they basically, you know, assume that they do different things. And thus they serve, you know, the same people, theater goers, and some of them, you know, some of the shows they do serve different people. People who like musicals, people who don't like musicals. But you know, it's just this sort of sense of, and what, you know, Fleurette was saying, this sort of sense that there is this Black community. So there's only one voice, and there's only one thing that needs to be talked about, and one thing that needs to be said. And I think what all of the ADs and what Quincy continues to do is basically say, no, there's a gazillion stories out there. We're looking for them. You know, some people tried to hide them, but we're finding them, and we're going to tell them, and we're going to tell them in a gazillion different ways, in a gazillion different forms. And you know, I'd like to see other, you know, Black theater companies pop up that tell stories in a different way, right? And you know, in different fashions and different ways, so that people can actually go and sort of go, which show am I going to see today? And not sort of feel that they can only go one place to find, you know, those stories.
Oh, may the universe hear you. Inspiration, companies, go out there, start. You need to have your first anniversary so you can celebrate your 50th also. Yes, wouldn't it be awesome to know that you have to pick between like your
Well, God bless you. It's the light. Thank you. Light.
But yes, could you just like share a little bit of words, and just for the other women out there, what was it like, that experience of being an AD of a company? And it's such a great institution now, knowing that that's part of your baggage.
Yeah. Well, I was, again, very lucky, because at that time, there were a lot of strong women in the organization. So Jackie Webb was the president of the board. There was a woman by the name of Carolyn Devine, who was my general manager. There was Desiree Toussaint, who was doing our publicity. There were a lot of women of various backgrounds. And
lots of Black women in Black theater.
Yeah, and non-Black women, in every color and every shape and size and age. And so there were many of us there, not to mention all the amazing actors that came through BTW. So I felt, again, that BTW was in some ways a very progressive space, right? Maybe even more so than the sort of big theater, predominantly white institutions. Like, I won't mention them, but I think in some ways, because of our sort of flexibility and maybe our base in community, I think we were a little bit more progressive in some ways in the way we ran the company and the types of shows we did. It's really interesting, because I think I had youthful naivete on my side, because I was 21. I was only 21, which my daughter is about to be 20. I barely trust her with my car, leave alone an organization. And I think to myself sometimes, what was the board thinking? Like, they really just were like, here you go. And what, again, that's such a blessing when I think about what I was given, the huge responsibility of it. But I think I didn't know better. And in some ways that served me, because I was just like, I want to do theater. All of the other stuff I'll figure out. And it was that, and so I just came in like gangbusters to get it done. I actually think that the thing that at that time was more of an obstacle for me was my youth. Was the not knowing, the lack of experience in some ways, more so than being a woman and being a person of color, all of those things. But, one of the things I've come to understand better as time has gone on is the need for more women to write, more women to tell their stories, as we were talking about the importance of storytelling, to be a part of the playwriting process. We have gotten much better in the theater community as a whole of embracing female directors. But as you saw just from the Academy Awards the other night, this is only the second woman to be given an Academy Award for directing in the whole history of the film industry. So it's not just particular to Black theaters or even theater. This is, sexism is an issue across all sectors. We know that. We're not paid equally. We're not given the same opportunities. We're just now seeing a vice president in the United States who is a woman and a woman of color. Amazing, moment in time, but a long time coming. And it's not a pipeline problem. I've heard people say that there's not enough women in the pipeline, and so therefore there's just no talent. That is not true. I teach in a university program at U of H, and it's specifically about arts administration. The majority of my students are women, and then something happens in the mid-career, and we lose them because we don't have structures in place in the society to support women if they decide to have families, if they decide to, whatever happens, and we lose, there's like a void that happens. And so they're there ready to take on responsibility, and then we don't see them in sort of the upper echelons of leadership anywhere, academia, theater, film, corporate world. So I think we all have a lot more to do. And I think that the best thing we can do as women in the field, now older women in the field, is provide opportunity to female directors, writers, women in positions of leadership, and give them that mentorship and give them that support. Know that, that we can make it better as we move forward, and make up for perhaps the opportunities that we weren't given or couldn't have by, paving the way for the next generation. So I think it's one of those things that, like I said, is not particular to the theater, but I do believe in the past 25 years we have seen some positive changes in this area, and it's continuing to change, and it's continuing to be challenged. And I give a lot of credit to young people, not just with the issues of sexism, but race that we saw this last summer. Look at these movements that have happened across the planet, not just here in North America, that have for the most part been ushered in by young people. So I have a lot of hope for, what's to come in the future. I think we're going to see more and more change and more women in positions of leadership.
Thank you for these amazing words of wisdom. I hope that women are hearing it. Just go for it, tell stories, get out there, get into the universities. That's one thing that I remember when I was in university. You look around and you're like, Black women, where are we?
Yes.
We in these rooms. And
yes, that is still a problem in academia. It really, really is, because you're right. So much of it we learn as students, right, in the classroom. And if we don't see ourselves reflected in that leadership, there's a sense of, well, I don't see it, so I can't be it, so I'm just stepping away from it. So the modeling, of leadership is so important in our communities, and we have to keep chipping away at that for sure.
thank you.
And that's something that, that extends into the Black presence as well. Because I remember, in theater school, I was at John Abbott first, and there was me and a gentleman by the name of Gary Jean, and that was it in theater school. And when I went to Concordia, there was me and I believe Dwight Backey.
Dwight, yeah.
And that was it, right? And my inspiration to be an actor was actually seeing Sidney Poitier in To Serve with Love. So that adage, if you can see it, you can be it. Yeah. I think it's really, really important. And for me, I kind of get really, really excited when I see, in our artist mentorship program, so many young people, who have, dove into this crazy world of theater. And, I do a lot of film, I do a lot of television. I'm seeing more and more technicians and more people behind the camera. And it's because of the people that they saw that sort of said, oh, wait a minute, he's doing it, she's doing it. Maybe I can do it as well. So I think visibility is really, really important. For those of us who are doing it, making sure that young people see that we're doing it and that we are, making a living at it, for lack of a better way of putting it, so that, those hidden dreams that they have, they can sort of go, wait a minute, maybe I can take this out of the box and do something with it.
Sorry, I know we're running out of time, but in Canada there was an added dimension, which was the sort of reality of immigration, and that wasn't true for all of the Black communities across Canada. Of course, Nova Scotia and various other communities had many, many years, generations in the country. But for many of us, we were first or maybe second generation Canadians. And so there was this added sort of, reality of immigration and cultural identity and where our people were from and how Canadian are you. And so I think as time goes on, and there are generations of people of color, because really the floodgates only opened for immigrants of color to come to Canada in the 60s, you know, and so many of us were like, you know, pioneers, you know, we were like the first, you know, to come to the country and establish our communities. And so I think that, you know, like you were saying, Tyrone, is like the modeling is so important for young generations. And I think the culture is changing so much in Canada just due to the longevity of some of our communities and the roots that we had to kind of put in around culture, you know, bringing the culture, forming the culture, cultivating it as we were, you know, raising families and making a living and all of those things we had to do as fairly new immigrants. So I think it's an exciting time, you know, for Canadians and Canadian theater generally.
Absolutely. And Quincy, actually, it's funny because the story that you're saying, what you're talking about, both you, Fleurette, and Tyrone, is one of the stories I like to tell everybody all the time. But I approached the arts through music because that's what I saw. You know, I wanted to be a singer and I wanted to be Lauryn Hill because that's what was at the time. And then one day I get a music gig, but it's within a theater, like a performance, and it's directed by Quincy. And I had never seen a man direct a scene, and I had never seen a Black person being in control of the whole scene and taking artistic directions. And I was like, is this the boss? I'm not a Black person hired to entertain for. So that to me made my brain explode, and my whole life changed by seeing another person doing it and being in a room, realizing that it's possible to not just be the employee, but to also be the employer, to be the director, so to me, the power of representation, that's everything.
Yeah.
And my last question is to you, Quincy, because since you are now you're still the AD of Black Theater Workshop, of course, the question should be about the future and what is happening now and what is happening for the next few years. But I feel like our audience is aware of the Black Theater Workshop, the next productions. There will be some interesting productions coming up next year, and some of them are also in French, which means that we're now working in English and in French. Would you like to tell us why and how and what is happening?
Why is it's because it's necessary. You know, it's just not happening, and there is
it's not just me harassing you and being my name is
well, not even just with us, but I think even just within our local community. I mean, you know, we're here in Montreal, and Francophone theater in Montreal is pretty extraordinary. There's so much of it, and there's a lot happening. But then if you try to find those productions that tell stories from our communities, they are, to put it mildly, few and far between. And so for me, it's important to make sure that our communities, Francophone-speaking Black folks in Montreal in particular, to begin with, have stories that they can go to. And so I want to start branching out into the Francophone market. Over the past few years, we've done a couple of collaborations with Francophone theater companies. With Espace Libre, we presented Black Boys, A Buddies in Bad Times production that came in from Toronto in English with French surtitles. And then we collaborated with Le Théâtre Aujourd'hui to do, well, you remember this, Melody, we translated Lorraine Gale's Angelique into French and did a stage reading of it. Just a one-night thing, but it was a way of starting to connect with that audience. And now we're collaborating with La Licorne on one of the productions that's going to be coming up next year for us, Dominique Morisseau's Pipeline, which we've also had translated into French by Michel Lavigne, and we'll have a bilingual cast do the show for 2 weeks in English, followed by 2 weeks in French. Same cast, same costume, set, everything, and just do the show twice in each language. And for me, that's the start. It's the start of something new, to say that there needs to be Black French theater, especially in Montreal, and we're going to make sure that it happens. We're going to try to, at the very least. So.
There's a whole community that is so grateful. Cannot wait. I mean,
well, besides, you remember, sorry to cut you out there, Lydie, but remember, we saw some of them when we did Rendezvous La Caille, Jenny Laguerre's play as our school tour. The script was available in both languages, and so we did a few French performances of that as well, brought it back the following year for Conseil des Arts de Montréal en tournée. And that's when we really saw that there is a desire, a real desire for audiences to have French content.
We started further back than that,
Oh,
actually.
absolutely, yeah.
When we came, our lost heroes.
Right. We
Yes.
did that in
Was
English.
started- and then there was someone who did colored girls,
Oh, yeah.
and did a French version of it.
Lorena Gale, I think, we did that.
You
Yeah.
know, I tell you what I would like to do, though. I'd like to do something showing the incredible contradictions of the black person in the Western world who happens to be speaking a language because somebody's ship was late. The French ship got there late, and the Africans sold the group that they had to the French ship, and then the not the Dutch but the Portuguese. The Portuguese could not outgun the English and the French, so they changed the situation to become the suppliers of the English and French on the colonies in there. And then the fact that I could have passed mathematics, any other thing in Trinidad, but if I failed English, I didn't get a certificate. And then I managed to master that language and came here and find myself no, I don't want to accommodate them at all. I just want to show the contradictions of my life, and that I'm going to my grave. No, I'm serious. I'm going to my grave, and I can never ever get rid of this contradiction.
Mhm.
That is what I want to do.
That's the next play right there.
I don't want to explain. I don't want to
Play
accommodate them
development.
at all. I want to push the contradictions in the face and down the throats.
I hope this is recorded.
Next,
It is.
next season, ladies and gentlemen.
Time.
Yeah, I told
Next
you.
season, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah, I should have paid attention to the politics at this point.
We don't want to touch politics either.
Well, you were all absolutely lovely guests. I know that I wanted you all to just say if you could say 5 words to young directors, young artists who want to pursue this career, briefly. Dr. Baines first.
Let me hear. What's the question again?
If you had just 3 words to say to young artists, young directors who are still wondering what they're going to do with their lives, what would you give them as advice or words of wisdom?
Make sure that they get all the education they can, and never think and always be innovative, because the world tomorrow, it cannot be predicted from the world yesterday.
Beautiful.
That's it. Always be prepared to be thinking rapidly, quickly, and responses to a hostile external environment. I don't mean the external environment of people, the hostility of the world that sustains the life of everybody, the environment, everything.
How about you, Tyrone?
I would say, as an artist, whether you're a director or artistic director, or we serve the story. We don't serve ourselves. We don't serve our egos. We serve the story. And if we serve the story, then we will always be true to the story.
I live by that rule, absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Benskin. Fleurette Fernando.
Okay, I have 2 sets of 3, maybe. Tell your story. Don't be afraid.
Words of wisdom right there. We are so lucky, ladies and gentlemen. Quincy, words of wisdom.
Yeah, it's gonna be more than 3 words, just because I can't follow rules like that. I'm gonna just say, if you love it, pursue it, because you will always be able to find someone who's able to offer you a hand should you need it.
Truth, wisdom. We are so honored to have all of you with us. Thank you for sharing your knowledge. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your generous answers. I really appreciate it. Thanks again, all of you, for being here.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Here's to the next
Thank you.
50. Here's to the next 50. BTW.
Yeah.
Absolutely. We'll make it. Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you.
Good evening. Bye.
Good evening.
Yeah.
Oh, so that's it for us. Thank you so much for joining us for the Artistic Directors Roundtable. It's what a wonderful way of celebrating Black Theater Workshop's 50th season. Thank you for joining us and have a lovely evening. Till next time.